Hello and welcome to our discussion of Chapter 14 in BCOM, titled Interviewing for a Job and Preparing Employment Messages. We're going to start off by looking at 5 different types of interviews. The first is a structured interview. Now, a structured interview is where basically the questions are all the same and the process for each candidate being interviewed is virtually the same. It is a predetermined agenda, and the value of this particular kind of interview is that those who are conducting the interview can evaluate each candidate based upon the same criteria, based upon the same information gained from the similarity of the questions. Another kind of interview is the unstructured interview, and in this case, questions come up based upon the discussion, based upon the way the interview is going. The interviewer will ask different questions based upon whatever the interviewee is saying. This is very helpful when there are unknown areas to be explored and allows the interviewer to be able to conduct the interview as issues come up. A third type of interview is a stress interview. This is an unusual kind, but it is based upon the premise of trying to discover how a candidate will react when they are under stress. I heard of one stress interview in which the candidate sat down to begin the interviewing and the fire alarm went off. And the interviewer said, "Oh, don't worry about that, that sometimes happens." But the blaring of the noise and the running down the hallways of other people, it was all planned to try to disconcert the one who was being interviewed and to see how they might respond. There are other kinds of stress interviews, but the purpose of these is to see how the candidate responds under high pressure situation. A fourth kind of interview is the series interview. Usually the need for a series interview comes from the fact that there are many different people that the new candidate may have to work with, and each person who is going to be working with the candidate may want to have some input on who is selected. And so the candidate may be shuffled from one person to another person to another person for a series of interviews, and then at the end each of these persons who did the interviewing with the candidate will sit down and evaluate them together and be able each to have their own input on who to select. A fifth and final type of interview in the textbook is called the virtual interview. In this situation, the candidate is not present with the one who is conducting the interview. There may be a connection in video, as we're doing here, or in live Skyping, or long-distance telephoning, but the candidate is not present, and the interview is conducted electronically. I know my daughter felt like she had an advantage to others who were interviewed for a position she was interviewing. She was in Taiwan at the time, and the interviewer was so overcome with the fact that he was talking to the other side of the world that she got the job. Take advantage of these types of interviews. Take a look at some of the tips in the textbook on how to conduct long-distance or virtual interviews, and take advantage of any suggestions the textbook may offer. Now let's talk a little bit about how to prepare for interview and how to conduct yourself during an interview. Before the interview, research the company. Know something about the organization you're going to work with. The textbook on page 248 talks about a number of different questions that you should ask yourself. For example, what is the company's status in the industry? What is the scope of the company? Do you know some of the corporate officers? Do you know if they've been in the news lately? Know something about the job that you're applying for. Certainly you should know the title of the position and know a lot about the job qualifications and how you fit them. You may or may not be able to find information about the pay or the salary, but take that as it comes and be prepared, if necessary, to talk about salary needs. Usually, however, salary is not brought up in the first interview. A second way to prepare is not only by knowing the company, but by knowing yourself and what you want. We suggested in the previous chapter that it's important that you find a good fit with a good company, one that represents your values and one in which you could find yourself very happy and staying for many years. Know yourself, know what you need, know what your issues are when you sit before a person and are being interviewed. Know what makes you nervous, know what makes you comfortable, know what your strengths are. Be prepared by knowing yourself. Another issue is to plan your appearance. You want to present yourself just a few minutes early before the interview, certainly not late, and you want to be prepared. Make sure your fingernails are clean. The textbook talks about a number of other issues. Make sure that you're dressed well, certainly at the level of those who work at the company or exceeding that level, looking a little bit better. Not too flashy, rather modest, but look nice, look appropriate, look professional. Be on time and have extra materials. It never hurts to have an extra resume or 2 or 3 for an interview, and to have some other materials that will help to provide proof of what you're saying about yourself. And then finally, the textbook says you should practice for an interview. Think of some good questions that you might ask, and prepare for an interview by getting a friend to run you through the process. Maybe having 2 or 3 other people interview you and going through the practice several times will also help. It will get you through some of the butterflies that you might experience during the interview, and it will give you some experience in answering the questions that you probably will be asked. During the interview, there are a number of things to consider. The first is at the beginning of the interview and the opening formalities. The textbook says that within 60 seconds, usually a good interviewer will have an idea whether the interviewee is in fact going to be a good fit with the company. That suggests to you that those first 60 seconds are very important. Plan them out, think about them, how you will present yourself. Be ready to respond positively with a smile, maintaining good eye contact, a firm handshake, and ready to respond as asked. Wait to be seated until you are asked to be seated. Send positive nonverbal messages, and plan very hard to work hard during those first 60 seconds to make an impression. You'll make some flubs, just like I've made some flubs in my presentation so far. But as you are able to rebound from those difficult times and continue to present yourself well and positively, you will make a good impression. Have confidence in yourself. You're doing the best you can. You're prepared for the job. You find yourself in a good fit with this job, and you want the job. Have confidence that you will be able to make a good presentation. During the information exchange, there are a few things that you need to keep in mind, and the first is have an elevator speech prepared. Now, an elevator speech is something very simple. Imagine yourself getting on the elevator on the first floor of a building and traveling to the 5th floor of a building. In those 15 or 20 seconds or so of traveling from the 1st to the 5th floor, you may have an opportunity to talk to someone on that elevator about who you are and what you are all about. In 15 or 20 seconds, can you describe yourself and come up with a good sales presentation of why you should be selected for the job? Know 5 or 6 good reasons why you're a good fit for the job, so that if you're given the opportunity at any time during the interview, you can share those reasons. But be prepared with your 15 to 20 second elevator speech, so that if you're asked a question like, why should we hire you? You have 6 or 7 good reasons. You have a 15 to 20 second presentation of why you should be selected, and you are ready to talk and to share and to be able to open up about your feelings about the job, your preparation for the job, your qualifications for the job, and why you should be hired. Be prepared for standard interview questions. Questions like, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Those you can expect. But there are some behavioral questions that may also come. Questions that may ask you something like, what have you done in a difficult situation? Or how have you handled a customer who was very upset? Or how did you respond in a given emergency situation? Behavioral questions are usually answered with stories. Stories of how you did or stories of how you might respond under a given set of circumstances. Try to develop some scenarios in your mind before you go into the interview and have an idea of how you might answer those so that if the questions come up, you've at least given some thought and some preparation to them. Demonstrate logical thinking. Be creative as much as you can. Show a professional attitude and be ready for any kind of questions that come your way. Also, be ready to avoid illegal questions. Illegal questions you'll find on page 253 in your textbook. Questions that are not allowed to be asked during your interview. You cannot be asked if you are married or if you have dependents. You may not be asked what your ethnicity is, your religion, your age, whether you have a criminal record. These and a few other questions like them are not permitted. How would you respond if someone asked you an illegal question? Have you thought about a good way to respond to that? For example, well, I'm sure you don't mean to ask me if I have a criminal record. You wouldn't want to ask that. But may I suggest I've always tried to be a good citizen in my community, and take it from there. Be ready to respond to questions like that if they should come. And also have in your pocket a few questions that you might want to ask the interviewer. Questions that will help you understand the position that you're applying for or the company that you're trying to become hired in. Be ready to ask some questions. You usually will be given opportunity to ask those questions. And finally, at the end, when everything is finished and the interviewer has said, "Thank you for coming," you stand and with a firm handshake say, "Thank you very much for inviting me. I look forward to hearing back from you." The textbook continues with several other different kinds of employment messages that you should be familiar with. I'm not going to go over them now. We don't very often run into these kinds of messages, but there will be times when you want to respond, for example, with follow-up messages, when you want to respond and say, "Thank you for offering the job," or "Thank you for interviewing me even though I did not receive the job. Please keep me in mind." It may be that you want to ask for a letter of referral to someone, and the textbook talks about a number of these different kinds of messages. That's Chapter 14 in BCOM. Study hard, be prepared for the exam that's coming up soon, and have a good day.